opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the fastest growing talk radio station in Southern California. Home to 50,000 watts and an audience reach of 12 million listeners. KBLA Talk 1580 is a pioneer for black audio content, including our groundbreaking $2 million climate justice campaign and the most loyal, influential audience. According to an independent research study by the polling firm Aviterus, for the second consecutive year, KBLA Talk 1580 is the most trustworthy, reliable, and credible news source for black audiences and beyond in Southern California. Let KBLA Talk 1580 power your advertising dollars. Our omni-channel custom marketing solutions are specifically tailored to connect with your ideal target audience. We leverage audio, podcasts, streaming, digital, social media, and local activations to get your message out to the black community. Get in touch with our advertising team today at advertising@KBLA1580.com. That's advertising at KBLA1580.com. KBLA 1580. We've got you black.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and glad to have you hanging out with us today on today's program. A great show on tap. We've already done the first hour, and that was spirited, was it not? 2 great hours in front of us. There is breaking news, but there's breaking news every day these days. I had some guest on. Who was it? I had somebody on a few weeks ago, and they were saying that everything these days is breaking news. You turn on CNN, everything they post is breaking news. He said, that's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing, breaking the news. Everything ain't breaking news, but we call everything breaking news. But I think this is a bit of breaking news, given that we just talked about the president. In our first hour, we were joined by Michael Steele, former chair of the RNC, to see what they think about all this Democratic brouhaha and whether the president ought to step down. Then we were joined in the second half of hour one by James Zogby, who's a senior member of the DNC, who has brought forth a proposal to the DNC for what ought to be done, how it ought to be done, if the president eventually decides to stand down. He emphatically said earlier today on Morning Joe on MSNBC that he is not going to stand down. He's not getting out of this race. You heard me say in conversation with Michael Steele, I've said it time and time again. I've seen it many times in my career where they say publicly, I ain't going, I ain't going, I ain't going, I ain't going, and then they're gone. But the president has said he is not going anywhere. We shall see what happens in Chicago some weeks from now at the Democratic Convention. The president's told the Washington Post, I'm reading a story from there, that if Democrats want to challenge him, sure, right, come to the convention, challenge me. So we'll see what happens in Chicago. I'll be there covering it live the entire week. But this news now from the New York Times. Headline, Parkinson's expert visited the White House 8 times in 8 months. Parkinson's expert visited the White House 8 times in 8 months. The White House has said that President Biden has no signs of the disease and that there has been no reason to update the most recent testing conducted in February. And there's not a lot more that the White House is saying other than that, but they have acknowledged to the New York Times, who broke the story, that an expert from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Walter Reed, where the president is typically treated and does his annual physical, an expert on Parkinson's from that Walter Reed Hospital, Dr. Kevin Kennard, has been to the White House, we are told, 8 times in about 8 months, the most recent one being in February, and the White House says there has been, there's no reason to update the most recent testing because there are presently no signs of the disease, and there you have it from the White House. But that story, I'm sure, will again get more traction in the hours to come, the days to come. Now that we know that there has been a Parkinson's expert inside the White House at least 8 times over an 8-month period. Again, this story of Joe Biden continues to have legs and develop, and it will all the way through November, trust and believe. So there you have it. I'm giving it to you as fast as I get it, but that story, again, from the New York Times. All right, let's pivot now. In this hour, as promised, the conversation with journalists Louise Story and Ebony Reed talking about the pervasive systemic issue of black-white wealth inequality with their provocative new text. It's called 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap, a wealth gap, they argue, that has stifled economic progress for all Americans. We will talk about what should, could, oughta, might be done, ain't been done to close this gap, now that Louise Story and Ebony Reed join us for the rest of this hour. Louise, how are you today? Good to have you on the program.
Great to be here.
And Ebony, how are you today? Good to have you on as well.
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's my great delight to have you both on. Let me start with this. I am always fascinated, having written a few books myself, I'm always fascinated by book titles, and I believe a title ought to tell you exactly what you're going to get inside the text. This one does. It's the subtitle that jumped out at me, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. That word made jumped out at me. Ebony, tell me how and why we chose to go with that frame, that Americans made this black-white wealth gap. It didn't just happen.
Right, Tavis, that's because Americans did make the black-white wealth gap. And so through our reporting and the stories of the 7 families we chronicle and all the other experts and historians that we interviewed, we show that in the text of this book.
Tell me more
I want to add on that.
Sure,
I want to add on that real quick. We considered how America made the black-white wealth gap, and we very specifically decided we wanted it to be how Americans made it, because it's not just institutions or systems, companies, and government. It's people behind things. And we really worked hard to show that through the pages of the book.
Oh, I'm glad I asked that question. We're running now. We're cooking with fish grease, as they say. All right, Louise, tell me more about that distinction of Americans making this wealth gap.
Well, people take action and make choices. And we chronicle how from the very earliest days, people were doing things. For example, we covered the Freedmen's Bank, a story that every American should know. It was a bank set up for formerly enslaved people to put their money in, to keep it safe. But there were people involved in running this bank. They were white people, well-connected brothers, the Cook brothers, who ended up using money from this bank to buy troubled loans from another bank that their family owned. So that created a lot of distrust in banking by Black Americans, because these Black American families lost savings there. And we really show it throughout the book that people are making decisions. We talk about money over morals thinking, where people say they want one thing, they say they have good morals, but as soon as money gets involved, it changes their decisions.
This is my commentary, not theirs. I was just laughing as Louise, laughing internally, that is, as Louise talked about the Cook brothers. I'm thinking we've gone from the Cook brothers to the Koch brothers, but I digress on that point. That's a whole nother commentary, a whole nother show. This show, this hour, is about 15 cents on the dollar. How Americans made the black-white wealth gap. The authors of that text are our guest in this hour, and I'm glad about it. Louise Story and Ebony Reed join us right now on Tavis Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
Can you dig it? Come on!
Make a move into a home of your own. With City National Bank's Ladder Up Home Loan Grant, you could receive up to $20,000 that you never need to pay back. Use it toward your down payment, save on closing costs, or to buy down your mortgage rate. Find out more at cnb.com/ladderuphome. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Property must be in a qualifying market in California, New York, or New Jersey. Additional terms and conditions apply. Not all applicants will qualify. Terms are subject to change without notice. City National Bank is an equal housing lender. Member FDIC. NMLS number 536994.
Oh, man. Looks like Bobby needs a ride to the airport again.
Grab the keys.
Who's taking Auntie and her friends to the swap meet?
Grab the keys.
How about we drop these boxes off at Miss Johnson?
Grab the keys.
Whether you're giving rides or hauling gear, you're all about getting things done. So do it all in a Chevy SUV. From the versatile Equinox and sporty Blazer to the roomy Traverse, our lineup of SUVs will carry you through every adventure. All you have to do is...
grab the keys?
That's how we do. Head to your local Chevy dealer, where well-qualified buyers get 1.9% financing on all 2024 Malibu, Colorado, Blazer, Equinox, Trailblazer, and Traverse limited models. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
1.9% APR for 36 months. Monthly payment is $28.60 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 15.8%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take new retail delivery by 7/1/24.
paid for by government. Did you hear? A secret hoard of 1904 $20 gold Liberty coins have been found. These gorgeous 1904p gold coins are as bright and shiny as the day they were struck, and less than 500 of these gold coins are available. Coin experts are calling this secret U.S. gold coin discovery a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you can own a piece of the hoard. When you call, you are guaranteed a 1904 gold Liberty struck at the iconic Philadelphia Mint. With limited availability, you must call now. These 1904 dated gold coins are still in uncirculated condition with brilliant luster. That is 120 years of history you can hold in your hand. To learn more, call 1-800-973-3083. Call now and you'll receive a free bonus, a $75 value free with every order. Call 1-800-973-3083 now to secure your 1904p $20 gold Liberty coins before they sell out. That's 1-800-973-3083.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
Of Tavis Smiley and Ebony Reed and Louise Story, authors of the new book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. In case you just tuned in, they were very deliberate about that subtitle, How Americans Made This Wealth Gap. One believes, or has to believe, if we made the wealth gap, we can undo the wealth gap. We'll talk about that part as we move forward in this hour. So, Ebony, tell me more about the inspiration for the book. I'm always fascinated by the backstory, what pulls people in to want to write about the things they write about. So tell me more, Ebony.
Sure. So, Tavis, in the summer of 2020, like Americans across the country, Louise and I were having conversations about inequities we'd seen in our lifetimes, things we'd seen in the workplaces. You know, think back to that first pandemic summer, you know, we had the lockdowns, we couldn't go anywhere. And so we were colleagues at the Wall Street Journal. I had joined Louise's team a year earlier. And so when, you know, nights, weekends happened, you know, we had some Zooms and we just had conversations, and we realized through those conversations that there was no book that existed, that it was the complete history of the Black-White wealth gap, historical all the way to present day. And given that, you know, Louise covered Wall Street in the 2008, you know, financial crisis in our country for the New York Times, I was an editor at the Detroit News over local news, where it seemed like every day somebody knew someone that was losing their home to a foreclosure. We thought, given our backgrounds in financial and community journalism, that we would be the perfect pair to come together to write this book and to interview people across the country.
Yeah. Louise, tell me more about the origins of this wealth gap. It didn't, to your point, just happen. But let's do a little history here. Tell me about the origins, the early stages of this black-white wealth gap in America.
Absolutely. We include a data set that goes all the way back to 1860, comparing the average Black family's wealth to the average white family's wealth. And actually, right after the Civil War, the average Black family had 1.8 cents on the dollar compared to the average white family. And so you can see over time, when we chronicle how that moves and what was going on, it increases in part because, well, first of all, Black Americans were no longer enslaved. So they weren't counted as an asset, something that we all celebrated with Juneteenth recently. But also in the late 1800s, Black Americans managed to buy a lot of land and to get a lot of land. In the 1900s, they lost a lot of that land, which we chronicle, but we cover these dollar figures over time. By the 1950s, it got to 15 cents on the dollar. Then it went up and it got to 22 cents on the dollar in the early 1990s. And it moved around and it's come down. And today it's 15 cents on the dollar, whether you're comparing the median families or the mean. They're both at 15 cents on the dollar. And yes, you heard me correctly. That's the level it was at in the 1950s. So today we're at 15 cents on the dollar, comparing a typical Black family's wealth to a typical white family's wealth. And that's where we were in the 1950s. And what the book does is it shows you the things that happened in American and financial history that set white Americans ahead and held Black Americans back in terms of wealth accumulation through the generations.
I find myself making this point, Louise, more times I can count on this program and other spaces that I appear, that Black people in 2024 still lag far behind in every single leading economic indicator category. Not 1, 2, or 3, but in every leading economic indicator category, Black folks still lag far behind. Here comes Louise now, underscoring the point that I make all the time, that not much has changed regarding this gap between the 50s or since the 50s and today. Just pause for a second wherever you are and just imbibe that for a moment, that not much has changed in that regard. It's gone, it's ebbed and flowed, as she mentioned a moment ago. But look at where we are now versus the 50s. I digress on that point, at least for now. You said something, Louise, that got my attention. Before I get back to Ebony, I want to ask you to just unpack it a bit more for me, if you will. And that is the extent to which it's an arresting point, and none of us are naive or stupid. I got a really smart audience. They get this. But you put your finger on something I want to probe a bit. Tell me what you can about the extent to which white wealth back in the day was bolstered by these black bodies. The worth and value of these black bodies, these enslaved Africans, were factored, of course, into their wealth, white wealth. What do we know about that?
Yes, we cover that in the book. We talk about, first of all, just the value that was put in terms of the wealth by owning enslaved people. But we also cover things, for example, the panic in the 1830s, when you can see that white Americans were borrowing money where the loans were collateralized or securitized essentially by their enslaved people. So white Americans were able to leverage and borrow money off of the backs of these people that they enslaved. And they used that money to buy more crop seeds and to buy plantations. And so that is very essential. But another thing that's essential that we also cover is it was not only wealth for Southern white people, it was also wealth in the Northern economy. We talk about the banking system and bankers throughout the United States and also in the United Kingdom, who were doing all kinds of financial deals that, again, were backed by these enslaved people. And so it was a whole system, and we chronicle that, and we also chronicle the way risk-based pricing was created in the insurance and banking industry that has assumptions that really put risk on the individual still today for things that may not be caused by that individual. So through the course of the book, you'll see how those assumptions that date all the way back to the 1700s and 1800s when we had a system of slavery are still in the system today.
Speaking of those assumptions, Ebony, let me come to you now with something that Louise mentioned earlier that I want to get you to unpack for me. And that is this notion of black distrust in banks. When she said that, my mind immediately went to people in my own circle, and every black person listening right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. There are folk in your circle, your grandmama, your big mama, your Madia, your grandfather, somewhere in your family, you have seen or witnessed or heard the story of black people putting money in all kinds of tin cans and Crown Royal bags. You pick the source. But there are stories, and I'm thinking of my grandmother. I'm thinking of my godmother. My godmother at one time, I kid you not, let me just put this out there because I know, again, I'm not the only one with this story. My godmother at one point took very, very ill, and I had to go into the house to do a few things to help her. And I kid you not when I tell you I found well into six figures. I didn't say 100,000. I said well into six figures of cash money stuffed in pillowcases, under mattresses, just money everywhere. In part because this is a generation of black folk who don't trust banking institutions. Louise put her finger on it with the Freedmen's Bank. And how these black folk, the newly freed, those who had been enslaved, were newly freed, and they got ripped off by the white people, by the Cook brothers, putting their money in the Freedmen's Bank. You think about the Tuskegee experiment, why black people don't trust the medical profession. These dots need to be connected, and that's why I want to spend some time on this, because this stuff, there's a backstory to much of the trauma that black people still deal with economically, politically, socially, culturally. There's a backstory to all of these things. What say you have been the consequences of black people in 2024? What are the consequences of us not ever having really, truly trusted the banking system in this country?
Well, Tavis, first I want to say that it isn't Black Americans' fault that they don't trust the system. There have been a series of things that happen. So like you mentioned, Freedmen's Bank, we touch upon in the book on the 2008 economic crisis. But then there are also other things that happened in our country, such as if we look at the GI Bill, where things private and public were not made equitable for Black Americans to participate. And so, when we talk about this distrust, it's the buildup of many things over time. So I want to talk a little bit about the GI Bill because that's an example of something that was created in our society by the government, not by banking, but it was, a program set up for veterans who fought in World War II. It's supposed to be open for all veterans, regardless of race. And Black veterans, by a large amount, were not able to use the GI Bill to buy a home. And so I want to use that example and point to that because in order to use the GI Bill to buy a home, they would have to have equal access. This was a federal program, but it was administered at the local level. So discrimination crept in. But even when you go to buy a home, you have to have assets in a bank, right? And so, I point to that because that one program helps bolster white middle-class Americans in our country that had served in World War II. And there's some estimates that Black Americans, it was less than 3% that were able to use a GI Bill who fought in World War II to buy a home.
And underscore one more time the reason why Black people could not use that GI Bill. I want to make sure everybody's clear on this.
Sure. So it was a federal program, and it was set up for people to be able to go to college, to buy homes, also to start businesses. And it was administered at the local level. So while it was a federal benefit for all who had served in World War II who were veterans, people had to go to local authorities to apply and use the benefit. And so Louise and I, we interviewed, dozens of families, who had a relative for this book that served in World War II. And the vast majority of Black Americans who served and who went to use the bill were not able to. Some of them told us that it was because they faced discrimination at the local level, and they were told, you can't buy a home in our community because there are restrictive covenants on these homes. So even if we approved you for a loan, you wouldn't be able to buy a home. Others told us stories about how their relatives were simply told no at the bank. And others told us stories about how their families were just afraid. Thinking back to that time period, it was not safe, for Black Americans to buy a home in any neighborhood. There were still, documented cases well into the 80s, and we point to some in the book where people, faced violence when they moved into certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So that is the reason so few, and there are some academics, out there who have done research that say that if, Black Americans had equitably been able to use the GI Bill who were veterans, that our country may have seen another 400,000 plus Black homeowners today.
Well, there are a number of things that we know that your brilliant commentary remind me of in no particular order. We know, of course, that home ownership is the path that most Americans tread when it comes to building wealth for their families. And if you're denied a home, then you're denied the opportunity to get in that lane, as it were, to start to build wealth. If you can't do it, of course, with home ownership. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Second thing that comes to mind is that Black people have fought in every war in this country. Every war in this country we have fought. We fought in the Civil War when we were yet enslaved. We fought and volunteered to fight while we were yet enslaved to save the Union in that fight against the Confederacy. That is arresting in and of itself. But in World War II, that Ebony makes reference to now, this is where you get, we're talking about the Tuskegee Airmen. I mentioned Tuskegee earlier. You got Tuskegee Airmen who are doing their part. You've got Black folk who are boots on the ground, as we say. And even after they defeat Hitler, this is all part of our story here. Even after these Black folk defeat Hitler, they are forced to ride out of Europe on the back of the train. Wait for it, behind Nazi war criminals. They have to ride on the back of the train behind Nazi war criminals. If that is an insult after you've saved the world from this catastrophe, I don't know what is. And then when you get home, for racism and other reasons, you can't take advantage of the GI Bill. So then you're denied opportunities to go to college, you don't get your homes, you don't start building wealth, and you end up exactly where Ebony has laid out. It's important when we have these conversations, again, I think, to connect all these dots historically so you get a better picture and a fuller understanding of why a book like 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Wealth White Gap, is necessary and timely. And again, this conversation right now underscores that subtitle, that we Americans made this black-white wealth gap. I digress for now. Louise, back to you. There are a few things over the course of my career. I've discussed, obviously, in all the years I've been doing this, quite a few subject matter. And there are a few things to me that economically, at least, are as stubborn as this black-white wealth gap. Few economic realities, to my mind, that are as stubborn as this black-white wealth gap. I'm not naive in asking this question. Why is this black, white wealth gap so stubborn?
There are many reasons, but one reason is just simply the amount of money that is in the hands of white Americans versus black Americans, and it's passed through generationally, not only when someone dies, but also through help that parents give to their children throughout those children's lives, and making it so that there's different levels of student debt, for example, whether your parents can support you more in college or not. Different times people can buy a home, whether or not their parents help them on a down payment. So that's one major reason, is just the massive wealth. But there's other reasons, which we chronicle in the book. One of the most interesting things to think about, because when people say 1950s was the same level as now, people think about the civil rights movement and all that has happened since then. And they say, but wait a minute, education was expanded. There was affirmative action. So a lot of people are surprised to hear that the gap is still here. And what people forget is that with education and access to education came payment. People had to pay for it. So again, families who have more money to pay for education, their children take on less student debt. And so the average black college graduate has $25,000 more in debt than the average white college graduate. And so again, with wealth is the difference between what you own versus what you owe. And so when you have racial patterns in debt loads, that affects the wealth level. And people forget that because debt is hidden and they only see assets. But that's a big part of the picture. And then the third factor that's major in this period of the last 40 years is that the stock market had a really big period of increase, and Black Americans who had money to invest disproportionately invested in housing versus white Americans, and white Americans put more of the money that they had to invest in the stock market. And so those would be some of the biggest reasons. And of course, there's many, many other factors we chronicle in the book, such as, for example, inequities and bankruptcy and all kinds of things.
We'll dig a little deeper when we come forward with our guests, Louise Story and Ebony Reed. Together, they are the authors of the new book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. More with them when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Paid for by government.com. Did you know the United States Mint has issued a new Morgan silver dollar coin in proof condition for the first time? Not only that, they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 400,000 of these legal tender silver dollars were issued. These first ever Morgan silver dollars are brand new with stunning mirror-like finish, minted by the iconic San Francisco Mint. Call now and you're guaranteed a new first ever 99.9% pure silver proof Morgan dollar. To learn more, call 1-800-973-9717. If you order now, you will receive a free coin collector bonus pack, a $25 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-973-9717 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. That's 1-800-973-9717.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Tests are showing more than a dozen metals in a large number of tampons sold in the U.S. and Europe. Researchers found lead in all 30 tampons from 13 brands tested. Traces of other metals were also found, including arsenic, mercury, and others. In Maryland, condolences continue to pour in following the Saturday morning crash that claimed the lives of 3 star football players in Prince George's County. The crash claimed the lives of Kyrie Jackson, who was drafted by the NFL's Minnesota Vikings, along with former Wise High School classmates Isaiah Hazel and Anthony Lighton Jr. Maryland Governor, African-American Wes Moore, called Kyrie Jackson a true talent who touched many lives, and he mourns him and his 2 teammates. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Want to save up to 50% on new blinds and shades? Blindstar offers custom-made blinds, shades, and shutters at prices way less than big box retailers. And right now, save up to 50% off any order during Blindstar's July 4th sale. Hurry, sale ends July 8th. Blindstar.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers held Bronny James out of Sunday's game against Golden State in the California Classic in San Francisco. LeBron's son has some swelling in his left knee after playing Saturday night against Sacramento. The Lakers rookie team coaching staff says sitting Bronny down was only a precaution. Bronny is expected to play Wednesday against the Miami Heat rookies in the final game of the California Classic. Compton native DeMar DeRozan had a chance to sign with the Lakers and Clippers as a free agent. He chose the Sacramento Kings. DeRozan signed a 3-year deal with Sacramento for $74 million. DeRozan played the last 3 years with Chicago. A major upset at Wimbledon Sunday. Coco Gauff, the last remaining African-American in the prestigious tennis tournament, lost in straight sets Sunday to American Emma Navarro. Gauff was the number 2 seed at Wimbledon. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We must understand the politics of our community, and we must know what part politics play in our lives.
Questions about black voters, their disengagement, lack of information, and support or lack thereof for Democratic candidates have once again taken center stage as Democrats, Republicans, and independent candidates compete for this critical voting bloc. Will black voters abandon Democrats in this election, move historic numbers of votes toward the Republican nominee, or will they continue a decades-long trend of overperforming for Democratic candidates up and down the ballot? The stakes have never been higher for black America. Tune in to KBLA's new show, The Black Pack, hosted by veteran political strategist Adrian Shropshire, every Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. for a breakdown of the issues, rhetoric, polling, and more this election year. It's The Black Pack with Adrian Shropshire, Fridays from 4 to 6 p.m. exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580. Environmental justice is racial justice.
Environmental justice is social justice.
This is KBLA Talk 1580.
Sometimes I struggle to get to sleep. My body stopped for the day, but my mind is still running. So I take ZQuil.
ZQuil, the world's #1 sleep aid brand, has a range of non-habit-forming products to fit you and your family's needs. Invest in a great night's sleep for the best you tomorrow.
I'm awake and ready to take on anything.
Better days start with ZQuil nights. Explore our products at ZQuil.com. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Hey guys, did you know there's a generic form of Viagra that works just the same, but is 95% cheaper? And you can get it online? Go to hims.com/joy. Through HIMS, you'll get a free medical consultation, discreet shipping if prescribed, and the process is 100% online. To start your free online visit, go to hims.com/joy. That's HIMS.com/JOY.
He's rooting for everybody black.
Everybody black.
More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
More of Louise Story and Ebony Reed coming your way right now. Their book is called 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. All right, Ebony, we referenced this earlier. Tell me more about these families who you and Louise spent time with, how they were chose, what you wanted to get out of them, what you chronicled. Just give me a broad overview of these families that are at the epicenter of the text.
Sure. So, Travis, in the summer of 2020, there was a new banking initiative that was announced that was named Greenwood Bank. And part of its stated mission was to focus on the Black-White wealth gap. Mm-hmm. And so 3 of the founders, Andrew Young, who many may remember, ambassador, former Atlanta mayor, is in the book. This is the deepest account of his historical background and the tracing of his family tree. Also, Michael Render, who is known as Killer Mike. He's a Grammy Award winning rapper. This also provides the deepest look at his family tree. And he was also is also one of the founders. And then Ryan Glover, who's a television executive, is also one of the founders. And so we looked at them, initially because of the bank, but also found them to be very interesting people, and found, the looks at their families and the things their families experienced also to be interesting. The others who are in the book may be lesser known to most people before they read the book. And some of them represent either customers of the bank or people who fit the profile of the type of customers that Greenwood wanted to reach out to. So we have Tandria, who is a technology worker. She's from rural North Carolina and wants to move to Atlanta and does live there for a while and finds it to be an expensive place to live. And so we chronicle her story and her family story. There's also a man who lives in New Hampshire, who was from Eastern Georgia, and we actually met him. His name is Brooke Bacon, while we were on a chronicling a justice walk that he was on, where he was seeking justice for his father, who was killed by the police in the summer of 2020. And then there's also a young civil rights leader who was the youngest person to hold the statewide position in Georgia. And then we also have an entrepreneur who, Mr. Lovelace, who was running a barbecue business next to a gas station in Atlanta. And we spent significant time there talking with him, relationship building, to learn his story.
Ryan Glover, I know, but Andy Young and Michael Render, Killer Mike, I consider personal friends of mine, dear friends of mine. So I was fascinated when I got in the book to see their stories. Just top line quickly, if you will, for the audience, what you or what they, answer how you choose, found fascinating about their backstories, economically speaking.
Well, I think one of the things, and I'm sure my co-author Louise will want to weigh in on this too, but for Andrew Young, one thing that was striking to me in the research was that he didn't know that he had relatives that had put money in the Freedmen's Bank. And so Louise and I were able to share that information with him from our research and talk with him about his family tree.
And what about Michael? Sure, Louise, go ahead. Sure.
Let me add on Andrew Young. In addition to us finding that he had 5 relatives who lost money in the Freedmen's Bank, we also found that he had a grandmother who did a sit-in in the DeGive Opera House in Atlanta. And so he had, peaceful activism in his family. And that was really interesting too. And we saw this with many people where we chronicled their families over generations, that people are passing traditions down and stories down, and kind of makes sense that his grandmother did that,
Yeah. What about Michael Render? Killer Mike.
So much there. Well, you were talking about the Tuskegee Airmen.
Sure.
One of the things we include in there also is he had a relative who was part of the Tuskegee trial, where they had people take medicine, and essentially fake medicine. So we talked with some of his family members about the very scant compensation that his family got from that. So there's a lot in Michael Render's family that we chronicled that was new. We also chronicled things from his own life that haven't been public before. For example, his personal bankruptcy case in 2011. And, there you can really see in what he experienced something that's very common for Black Americans, which is that his case was thrown out essentially. And the data shows that Black Americans who file for bankruptcy are less likely to get their debt reorganized or discharged than white Americans. And again, in this wealth equation, wealth equals what you own minus what you owe. If you can get what you owe to go down, be forgiven or be restructured, that means your wealth's going up. So there's a real wealth gap consequence about any inequities in the bankruptcy system. And we delved into that through Michael Render's story.
What do we, again, I find myself prefacing this question again with this statement that I am not naive, neither is this audience. But again, it begs the obvious question. Why are Black people more likely to have their bankruptcy filings discharged than white people. Why?
Well, I mean, there is a trustee, in the case, and those people can ask questions, and it really has to do with the system and how it works. I don't know if Louise wants to.
Yeah, I'll add on. There's numerous reasons. Yes, as Ebony said, there are more white judges and more white trustees, and there's simply data that shows that when you combine white officials with Black people in the court system, the outcomes are different than when it's Black judges and Black trustees. So that is one factor. Ebony's correct. In addition, though, there's different types of bankruptcy filings. There's Chapter 7, there's Chapter 13. And Black Americans, they only file for bankruptcy in proportion with the amount they are in the public population. So it's not like Black Americans file more, but Black Americans are more likely to file for Chapter 13 than white Americans. And Chapter 13 is a more difficult process to get through successfully. And so there's pros and cons of the two processes, and it's not clear that one of the processes is better. With Chapter 13, you get to hold on to your house if you're successful, and your car. You can get child support restructured, where you can't do that in Chapter 7. But that is something that people have examined this, think has led to the difference in outcome, is the different types of filings they do. And there have been some good research and pieces done about why bankruptcy lawyers tend to steer white people versus Black people to different types of filings.
Let me just ask you point blank, to what extent is race a factor in this?
It's a factor. Research has shown by numerous professors that race is a bigger predictor on whether you're going to have a successful bankruptcy discharge than whether you're employed, than what your income level is, than all kinds of other factors. That is a bigger predictor. So it is correlated with a less likely outcome for bankruptcy relief.
There's been one thing that's been one frame that I've been wrestling with the entirety of this conversation. Let me tell you what it is now, and I'll get Louise Story and Ebony Reed to sound off on it when we come forward. But here's what I've been thinking about this entire conversation, and frankly, I thought about it when I went through the book. And that is that we live in a moment, and I'm not in any way suggesting that this is not as real as rain, but we live in a world where we hear all the time that what Black people need is greater financial literacy. We need more financial literacy. Throughout my career, I've been a part of programs, and I've done TV programs and radio programs and symposia, you name it, I've done it in my career around the issue of financial literacy for Black people. I believe in it. And yet when you hear two authors, Louise and Ebony in this case, talk about the historical underpinnings of this stubborn and steady Black-white wealth gap, when you hear them talk about how Americans made this Black-white wealth gap, it calls into question this whole notion of Black people just being stupid when it comes to money. And I know I'm just being crass about it and direct about it. Nobody's saying that we're stupid, but it's all this talk all the time about financial literacy. But that is always disconnected from this part of the story, which is that white folk, let's just call it what it is. When they say how Americans made it, it ain't just Americans, even with respect to the two authors. The good white folk, the institutions, those Americans are the ones who helped make this Black-white wealth gap. And somebody ought to say it. I think I just did. The point is, when we come forward, I'm trying to get some, I want to juxtapose this notion of Black people always being told they need greater financial literacy, which may very well be true. But again, that's disconnected from how this mess happened in the first place and why it continues to happen. And in that sense, you can't put all the blame on Black people. I digress. For now, we'll hear what Louise and Ebony have to say about that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to
scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone, and should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement. Check your statement every month.
If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
Did you know that feeling sluggish or weighed down could be a sign that your digestive system isn't working at its best? Taking Metamucil every day can help. Metamucil fiber powders help promote your daily digestive health using a plant-based fiber called psyllium. The gelling action of this special fiber traps and removes waste so you can feel lighter and more energetic. Metamucil, promoting digestive health for a better you. Learn more at metamucil.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Our daughter Jessie loves playing detective.
But since we discovered she has sensitive skin, we've been playing detective too.
We thought the problem was our puppy.
But it was actually our old detergent. So we switched to Tide Free and Gentle.
Tide Free and Gentle has no dyes or perfumes, so it's gentle on her skin.
If it's gotta be clean, it's gotta be Tide Free and Gentle. This back-to-school season, Tide and Downy are giving back with $1.5 million in scholarships. Enter to win. No purchase necessary. US/DC 17+. End September 30th. Rules. Tide.com/scholarship/official rules.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. Pro Football Hall of Famer and urban peace pioneer Jim Brown believed in just that. So he founded the AmeriCAN Foundation for Social Change in 1988, focusing on at-risk and high-risk youth in underserved schools and juvenile detention facilities, as well as adult incarceration and reentry initiatives. The core of the AmeriCAN program is its 15-chapter life skills curriculum. Mastery of these skills allows individuals to meet their academic potential, conform their behavior to acceptable societal standards, and improve the quality of their lives by equipping them with what they need to confidently and successfully contribute to society. Today, the foundation is led by its president, Monique Brown, who has been actively involved in the organization for more than 25 years. The AmeriCAN Foundation continues its work in memory of its founder, actor, philanthropist, and NFL legend Jim Brown. To get involved or make a donation, please visit AmeriCANCommunity.partners. That's AmeriCANCommunity.partners. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
More honesty than you can handle.
More empowerment than you can imagine.
You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Louise Story and Ebony Reed, I'm trying to juxtapose my being literate with a deliberate attempt to hold me back. So all this talk about financial literacy is real, and the need for it in black communities. No question about that. Again, I've been a part of many programs that do that. But, and this ain't scientific, I'm just making this up. My literacy may be, 20% of the problem? But the 80% is there's a knee on my neck, and that's what y'all have laid out in this book. And that those two issues are never connected in these conversations. Louise, Ebony, somebody.
Well, I mean, Tavis, you were right about our title being very deliberate on this book. And the reason we have the title 15 cents on the dollar is because that is the black-white wealth gap. Mm-hmm. A typical black family has 15 cents in wealth for every $1 in wealth a typical white family has. And that comes from the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. There is not anything people can do. It will be very difficult for this to change with just individual actions, right? So it's such a huge gap that, people ask Louise and I all the time, who is at fault? Is it private or is it public? Is it the government? Is it business? It's the systems that we lay out in the book that it's beyond something that one person can overcome.
Which raises, go ahead, Louise, please, come on, jump in.
And just to add on to what Ebony said, we made this our title because all Americans need to know the statistic. We want 15 cents on the dollar to be a nationally recognized statistic. This is not something that just Black Americans should know. White Americans need to know the statistic. And, we should also all talk about the Latino white gap, which is 22 cents on the dollar. That's more complex, a topic for a different time.
Yeah.
But, we should all know this. It's something that we all need to be more financially literate about, which is this gap. I just want to say, Tavis, what you and Cornel West did so well in The Rich and the Rest of Us is you really push people to question assumptions about poverty. And that's why we wrote this book, was to help people question assumptions. For example, Black Americans are more likely not to finish college. And so people might make assumptions on why do Black Americans drop out and not finish as likely as white Americans. And so we include in the book an example of a Black American who had to drop out of college. It was Northeastern. The reason he had to drop out was not because he wasn't working hard or doing well, but because Northeastern came to him and said, oh, we realized you didn't put a cosigner on your financial aid paperwork. And without a cosigner, you can't stay. And he didn't have a family member with the assets or the wealth to co-sign. Yeah. And so people who are assuming why people drop out of something or why they take actions may not know the whole picture. And so we wrote this book for all Americans. We are a white and Black pair of authors writing to make all Americans more literate about the Black-White wealth gap.
And I'm glad you did. It's an amazing text, and I've been honored to have had them on for this hour to talk about it. When we come forward in our remaining moments with the authors of 15 Cents on the Dollar, Louise Story and Ebony Reed. Ebony already teed this up for me. This is how we'll close. Given that it is 15 cents on the dollar, and given that Ebony and Louise both made the point that Black folk can't do this alone. They can't. The gap is just too big. They can't do it alone, which begs the obvious question. One, how long will it take? And what will it take for Black families to ever close this gap? If we can't do it alone, who are we looking to for some help? That part when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
You know where you want to go in life, and City National Bank can help. City National knows the dedication it takes to build your vision for the future into a reality, and our team is here for you. We have a wide range of options to help, from personal savings accounts to interest-bearing money market savings accounts and more, all designed to help you get where you want to go. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Learn more at cnb.com. City National Bank is a subsidiary of Royal Bank of Canada, member FDIC.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA reminds you that when we fight, we win, and we don't black down. LA Community Action Network, or LA CAN, was formed in 1999 when 25 residents of downtown LA came together and acknowledged the problems that existed in their community and made a commitment to do something about those problems, to stand together, organize, and become a force in the community that demands change. Civil rights and preventing the criminalization of poverty are their core projects. In addition, they take on women's rights, the human right to housing, and healthy food access. LA CAN also has projects focused on economic development, civic participation, voter engagement, and community media. While downtown LA remains their home base, with a particular emphasis on the Skid Row community, in 2007, they expanded their housing and healthy food access work into South Central Los Angeles. LA Can believes that power for low-income people and people of color is achieved through a large, active, and well-informed member base that utilizes a multitude of methods to advance their messages and goals. If you'd like to join the Los Angeles Community Action Network and organize people to fight back against oppression, please visit cangress.org. That's cangress.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Eggs are a staple in our diets, and there's only one egg with more delicious farm-fresh taste plus superior nutrition. Eggland's Best. With more vitamins, including 6 times more vitamin D and 10 times more vitamin E, plus 25% less saturated fat than ordinary eggs. Available in so many delicious varieties. Classic, cage-free, and organic. Eggland's Best. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Just got 3 or 4 minutes left in this conversation with Louise Story and Ebony Reed, authors of the book 15 Cents on the Dollar. Just some quick numbers. Ebony and Louise have provided some other numbers earlier. The penultimate number is the title, right? 15 cents on the dollar. That's what black folk make versus white folk in this country. But the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan think tank focused on economic and social policy research, found that the average wealth of white families in 2022 reached a record high of $1.3 million, compared to $227 for Hispanic families and $211,000 for black families. So the average white wealth of white families in 2022, $1.3 million, compared to $227,000 for Hispanics, $211,000 for black families. The median wealth for white families was $284,000, compared to $62,000 for Hispanic families and just $44,000 for black families. With those numbers, it is a uphill battle. Ebony made the point that this is too serious an issue. The gap is too big for black families to do this by themselves. Never mind all the talk about financial literacy. So, in the 2.5 minutes I have left, Ebony, you first. What do we do?
Well, there are a couple things. Louise and I have personal recommendations at the end of our book. One thing we encourage people to think about is to advocate for more wealth transparency. The statistic 15 cents on the dollar that we want to make a nationally recognized statistic is data that's updated every 3 years. And so we want people, to, when they can, to advocate for that in their communities. And there are some community foundations that are doing studies and research in this area to update their local statistics around this data in their community. The other is to work in partnership with someone who's different from you. And Louise and I have done that with this book. Yeah. We believe that if more people work with someone who is different from them, who has a different lived experience, they will better understand what another group of people experience in this country. And so, as Louise mentioned, she is white, I am black, but we also work through other differences to create this book. She lives on the East Coast. I'm based here in Kansas City in the middle of the country. We're in different time zones. We have different family structures. She's married with 3 children. I was widowed in the pandemic and I don't have children. So we really had to work through to create this book. Yeah. Our differences, and we had to think about time and money and all that goes into, a book project. And if more Americans, we think, were able to have this experience, it would impact how people think and see things, everything from affordable housing to student loans, when you really understand what another person is up against in our society.
Last 45 seconds, Louise, all yours.
Okay, you asked how long until the black-white wealth gap is gone. I'm going to give you the number. If the median family wealth, black and white, if they keep converging at the rate they've converged since 1989, it will take 291 years. We are not sharing this to be negative or, but to be real. And so people who think that changes they're seeing in their companies, their schools are going to change things in 20 years should just look at this data and the rate at which it's been moving so they can have real conversations about where things are going to stand 291 years from now, along the current path.
291 years. The book is called 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Black Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. I am grateful to both Louise Story and Ebony Reed for doing the work and their research to bring this to us, and I'm especially grateful for this conversation. Louise, thank you. Ebony, thank you. Good to have you both on. All the best to you.
Thank you.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Tests are showing more than a dozen metals in a large number of tampons sold in the U.S. and Europe. Researchers found lead in all 30 tampons from 13 brands that claimed the lives of 3-star football players in Prince George's County. The crash claimed the lives of Kyrie Jackson, who was drafted by the NFL's Minnesota Vikings, along with former Wise High School classmates Isaiah Hazel and Anthony Lighton Jr. Maryland Governor, African-American Wes Moore, called Kyrie Jackson a true talent who touched many lives, and he mourns him